Right, this is going to be another episode of Counterpoints. And I actually feel like there's an obvious perfect segue from the last episode, Maniac, because as we pointed out, if you are Mouz, you literally had to make a minimum the final at this tournament when that bracket was drawn. And quite frankly, I actually even think winning it like now also, even though I wouldn't say I would demand it because you were going to be playing like a FaZe or a Vitality, something like that. Maybe even Astralis who's on a heater. But in my opinion, like, this was almost like the minimum requirement for Mouz, precisely because of this context, Maniac, which is they are the new heroic. Like, they haven't yet figured it out in the big stage matches. Like, if you put them in a major, right now, you don't care what their form is. You just know that it's not going to be the same form that turns up in the game, and they're going to go through rough periods in the match. So, to me, it's like, I don't want to discredit this result, because actually, by the way, here's a little bit of a base take people probably wouldn't expect me to have. Normally, I would say I despise tournaments without like a really big stage component, because I actually think that is part of Counter-Strike. But here's the thing, especially as we're moving next year to having way more tournaments, I am fine with there being the odd tournament like this that's almost like a studio LAN, as it were, because the upside is it shows you stuff like this. It shows you that if you are someone like Mouz, it's why I'd say they are like the new TSM from 2015. There's clearly nothing wrong with their game, mate. Their game is fantastic. And if they don't have insane pressure, they've shown you now they can beat everyone. They can beat. That's why the joke is in that major run. Like, I think when they look back at that bracket, that'll be one of those ones you look back like, how did any of we could have beaten all these teams, mate. Like, again, maybe we would have lost in the final, but like, we went out in the first round. So, like, mad props to them for winning because it shows the potential, which I find really exciting. But this also, in a way, infers Maniac. Like, why are they doing this at the other tournaments? You know what I mean?
Of course. No. Listen, I'm right there with you with the assessment of what happened to Mouz. When during APL we did like the power rankings. We did like a power ranking during the group stage, then we did a power ranking during the playoffs, and I had Mouz number one. Any of these segments, I had Mouz number one. So what I said on broadcast then was that anything but a grand final would be a failure from them, and then what happened to the grand final, I think, speaks more about the absolute catastrophe that Vitality was. But when it comes to Mousesport, I feel like it's not like they have reached something that I hadn't seen yet. It was just, they came in here as the reigning champion in Malta. They won the previous season. They destroyed Na'Vi with Simple the previous season. And now they get to destroy Vitality with ZywOo. Very impressive. And obviously, we're going to talk a lot about this grand final because there's a lot to unpack. And I'm going to try my very best to separate, on one hand, how poorly Vitality played, how poorly ZywOo played, and all the problems attached to it. And on the other, what Mouz did great, because they deserved that win. Like, it's not like they just played average Counter-Strike and then Vitality happened to have a bad day and they just won. No, I think Mouz played very close to a perfect grand final. Like, incredible starts, very strong game plans, individuals feeling super confident, making moves. xertioN was lights out. Like, all of these elements we can list and we can talk about them later happened for Mouz. They deserve that victory, like champions, and no one can debate it. But this hasn't shown me something about Mouz that I hadn't seen before. So, golf clap, a bit of excitement. Let's bring that level to a different context. And then this is when you guys reach that next step. Because within that context, holy fuck, do they play good Counter-Strike.
No, I mean, yeah, the major positive I would start with is, this is why they weren't overhyped. Like, I used to think when the lineup had, like, I think it was before they got Yimpat. Before Yimpat, I always thought Mouz was overrated because they could do similar things in a group stage. But first of all, it didn't look as clean. Like, obviously, didn't have as many good players. And then they would fall apart in ways that were just more obvious even in the game back then. I mean, obviously, they didn't have Shuhei the whole time. Tosh was super raw. They were working with people like JDC back in the day. They had a very different lineup. People are forgetting that. But this era, when they got Shuhei and Yimpat, like, they actually have every tournament pretty much in the parts that are the least important cooked. Like, this is the team right now, for real, where you would just bet your life they make it through a Swiss system or group stage, mate. Like, you physically can't lose, right? And I think people are even forgetting this, Maniac. This was the team that right after Katowice just went, oh, high spirit, just fucking sent them home to. Like, at the fucking RMR, people forget that result completely, mate. Like, essentially, the only team they haven't been able to beat is FaZe, for whatever weird reason, just because FaZe always had it over. But they've now beaten Vitality as well. Like, the hype is this. Now, I said on past episodes, like, they're still young enough. I don't say, like, you've essentially, like, you're a failed choker team. You're obviously in that territory, but you're still early on in it at this point in time. By the way, even though it's an overstressed point, I will say, I do think there is some value that they now have Zipnix as a coach in that sense. Because one thing Zipnik's revealed in my interview series I'm releasing at the moment is, unlike some of the others, mate, he totally admits that TSM used to choke back in the day and that they obviously had some problems and that people were in denial of it, and that being in denial, pushes it further back and you have to deal with it later. So actually, if anything, at least he has the experience to understand what some people might be going through. Because I have to say, now that you have won this event, though, and you have 3-0'd Vitality, like, guys, Vitality is like a top 3 to 4 team in the world. Like, if you're going to 3-0 them on LAN, I have to actually now start saying it's no longer good to just make a playoff. Now I want to see like a real LAN trophy. In fact, you know what? Here's one that people probably haven't thought about. Why shouldn't this team be considered a true team that could win the fucking Shanghai Major? They should. For my money, you look at some of the other squads out there. That should be a real expectation. Never mind last one, we made the play. No, guys, like, winning the tournament should be for real now. Like, there's not even many steps left. So that gets me pretty hyped.
The only problem is that I had the same point of view after Pro League Season 18, and it didn't really transpire, right? They didn't win automatically after Season 18 at the end of CSGO. They still made a bunch of grand finals, but they lost to FaZe all the time. But I think, like, logically speaking, the way this is supposed to happen is that as they grow together as a collective, and a very young collective at that, if you think that Brolan is supposed to be like the veteran of that team, then that tells you a lot about like the profiles in that team. The idea, the hypothesis is that they're supposed to grow as a group and as a collective, and they're supposed to use these victories, the likes of the 3-0 Vitality, as kind of a safe in which they keep all of the things they've done right in that game, and then they're trying to apply that in a different context. And I know on paper it sounds very, very simple. It's not that easy, but I've always had the feeling that Mouz was one tremendous win away from always being like a contender for titles wherever they go. But it is still a theory that this Mouz we've seen here is going to show up exactly the same in Cologne. Right? Cologne is not that far away, and that's going to be an immensely important event, super pressurized, in Lanxess, thousands and thousands of people watching. It's not that far away. You could even make the case on a power ranking that Mouz right now might be number one. If you just take, like, you finger to the pulse of all the teams in Counter-Strike, who knows? Like, you actually, in a snapshot of time, you could say right now, they're the most informed group. They have a lot of energy, positives vibe. They're winning. They just destroyed Vitality. Now, you show up in Cologne, and if that doesn't happen, then where does that leave us? I think sometimes the step in the transition that we want to see from them can take a long time. And I particularly think that xertioN is a huge point of conversation within that context, because if he somehow can channel the confidence and the success he's had during that grand final into a different context, this is going to be a game changer for Mouz. Because if you remember the game versus G2 at the Major, xertioN has a horrible game, an absolute tragedy of a game on an individual level. And I really think that he's like the barometer of how Mouz feel, because they have a couple players that I believe are relatively stable. I think Yimpa is incredibly safe, barring some bad maps here and there, but overall very, very safe. I think Shuhi's calling is not going to suffer from pressure. I've never seen Mouz just throw away calls. But then I really think that wherever xertioN lands is a huge impactful factor for them. And I hope he takes that victory as a blueprint. Like, this is how I felt. This is what I did up to the game. This is how I envisioned the game. This is how I felt during the game. This is how I handled the good and the bad. The only caveat to this grand final win for Mouz is that I rewatched the VOD, they've had incredible starts on all of the maps. They never played with their backs against the wall on any of the map. Like, whatever they put to the table, all of the first half were tremendously in their favor. 9-3 first half on Inferno, 9-3 first half on Mirage, 10-2 first half on Nuke. This is what you call a Counter-Strike player's paradise. Whatever you're putting first is working. You got all the freedom in the world. You got wind in your sail, and you're rocking people. That, for me, that's the only caveat. But at the same time, they earned it. Like, it's not like someone gave them rounds out of nowhere. No. The way they approached the beginning of the games were fantastic, but they never had their backs against the wall at no point in this grand final, if you ask me.
I mean, that is usually the obvious way it goes, though, when you are the team that's like the chokers. Because if you remember, that was also what like old TSM was like. They were amazing front runners. If they just all got ahead and they had all skilled fraggers, they just batter you. Then there wouldn't be any reason to feel nervous, right? There'd be no moment where the pressure hit you. So I agree with that. Like, the difference is, you would even to this day take FaZe from like a difficult, like, you know, fucking tough scenario where they're down and everything's going against them. The other star players going. We haven't seen that from Mouz yet, but I will say they have the luxury. They don't really need it that much, Maniac. Because the thing that I find crazy still about Mouz is I thought it was just going to be a few events where like all the fragging it's just maintained, guys. Like the joke of it all is the name value is what's fucking the Mouz narrative up. Like, first of all, when people see the name Mouz and it doesn't have, say, Carrigan or Nico in the lineup, their brain doesn't let them think that can be a champion. That's supposed to be like, oh, you know, it's like a cool little underdog. And it's like, it really isn't. If you look at it, this is actually one of the best GM'd rosters in all of World Counter-Strike. Like, I mean, the joke right now is, as we'll get to in a minute, right? After the end of last year, everyone said Vitality had like a super team, guys, of like all the best fraggers, and now every Vitality fan is trying to get everyone except Zemu like cut from the team. Like that's what losing a Mouz does to you. Because I'll tell you what, when you have the fraggers, they do, guys. It's fucking. But like the joke is, everyone makes this big narrative because Frozen left and Brolin. It's like Brolin isn't even vaguely their best player, guys. What are you talking about? Like
I know
he's found his place again, and he can have maps where he goes. But he isn't like the star player from Fnatic back in the day. But they don't need him to be. Like they have, like as you say. xertioN, when he frags like that, like, this is like prime Yakindar, at least, I mean, you didn't get that much chance to do it on land, but like what was blowing people's minds was in VP. It's like the impact that will have on your T side is bonkers. Like the problem is you have to imagine what it's like to play a CT professionally, guys. Like if you're in scenarios where you just get like 2-1 bulleted to the head when you're holding a site, but you did everything right. You had the angle set up right. You commed it right. The other guy had the counter flat. There's no answer to that. It's like in certain sports. There's a great saying they always say in basketball. They say better offense beats better defense, as in like theoretically the best offensive player would still beat the best defensive player because on some level the best defensive player has to react, doesn't he? I know Counter-Strike's a little bit different because you have things like Pika's advantage, etc. But I think, yeah, obviously xertioN is like the barometer of the team because if he goes off, I don't know if there's many teams can beat the squad.
He's got something unique in that roster. Like the word I've used to describe him a couple of times is like he's a creative. Like, you know, there are a few players out there who create stuff out of situations, who like cross smokes or smell timings, take risks, go for multi-kills. Like he is that. And the downside of that, let's just say it's a double-edged sword, is that yes, sometimes it looks foolish because it doesn't work out and you can have really hard games. That comes with the territory. And I think this is why this Mouz team is so interesting, because they have excellent players in different substrats of Counter-Strike. Like Jimpa and xertioN are as opposite as you could possibly have on like how would you describe a player and what are their qualities and what are their strengths and whatnot. They're like on the polar opposite, but they're both very excellent at what they do. Jimpa, it's actually bonkers to think Jimpa is the highest rated player for this roster of 2024. Sure. And he's an anchor. Like this used to be, the storyline used to be, oh, you know, anchors, they don't really see a lot of people, you know, and maybe Rops broke that sort of curtain and that was it. No, Jimpa is like an anchor that is incredibly fragging, that is clutch player towards late round. Those don't make mistakes. And then on the opposite of that, you have xertioN, who tries and take risks and dares and goes for crazy moves. Like for Shui, he's got so many different pieces to play off of. And I maintain that his calling, and I mean, people said I overhyped him at the very beginning, but I thought what he did in Gamer Legion and early in Mouz, I thought he was already positioning himself to be like one day a next Carrigan. Like that's how I felt he was calling, the way he was aggressive in the calls, like what he did to Vitality. And it would be nice if we could ever like get an in-depth interview with some of them to see if he's got a whole lot of suggestions coming out of other players. But the way he maintained pressure on Vitality with the calls, that's like incredibly impressive. And even I, as a fan of Vitality or friend of some of the players, I could do nothing but clap my hands. Like, yeah, this is textbook. This is textbook what you're doing. You're playing with the advantage. You're keeping the pressure. You're changing the timings. You're reading them. You're calling rotations. You're gambling rotations ahead of time because you have the score for you. These are all assets of great IGLs. And I think he's continuing to build his legacy. For someone that is already that young, that's very impressive.
The only thing is, I have no downside to Shui. I do think he's good. I personally do think they should have fired Huxley ages ago and just given this guy the shot. It was the obvious player to take a chance on. In the same way as they took an insane chance on Monacy who never even played, because the idea was you knew if it worked out, then you have this guy for like the next 5 years and maybe he defines your whole generation. So I don't have any downside to him, but I will say I'm not going to give him like fucking full credit for all this roster. Like, first of all, xertioN was mega before he even came in. Back when they had JDC and fucking Dexter, xertioN was popping off. So and also, as you say, like Yakinda, he is clearly coming up with a lot of like entry approaches himself. There's no way that's like a call from Spawn or something. Like that would be insanity. Like Counter-Strike hasn't been played that way in about 15 years. And then also on the Impact one, he's not doing any of that stuff in the fucking post-plan scenarios, guys. That's just the genius of the Impact. Like that actually implies to me that the real question should be, what the fuck were all the other teams in Europe doing ignoring the Impact guy? Remember, he has no special reason he has to be in Mouz. Like he's not some player that has, like it's not like it's a German team and he's German. Like, what were all the other teams doing? What were all the Gamer Legions and the Ences and the fucking Apexes? What were you guys doing? Well, this guy was out there because this guy's skilled. Like you watch him play like the first tournament and he's amazing. Like he's just got like the Zipnix quality where you just know he's going to win all the clutches. He's always poised when he's under firefight against some better player, but it's in a late round stuff. So
to see more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content, well, subscribe to this channel then, or, be a pleb and don't.